In December 2009, when I was in federal prison, a new prisoner came up to me, found me, and said, "I've been following your blog. I have something you have to write about. I'm begging you to write about this subject." I said, "Well, what is that?" He said, I really encourage you to write about how the majority of defendants who sign a plea agreement, it's an inaccurate plea agreement. It's false. It's fraudulent. They've been forced, cajoled, pushed. Pick an adjective. They're forced, including me, to sign this plea agreement. Now, when I had this conversation with this new prisoner, I had been in since April 28th, so in about 5 or 6 months. And I'll acknowledge, when I surrendered to prison, I was very cynical, meaning I figured if you were there, you did it. Well, I will tell you, the majority of people who are in prison will acknowledge that they broke the law. It's very cliched and right out of Hollywood and sensationalized in prison movies when people say, "Oh, you're not innocent, yet you're in prison." No, the majority of people would say they did it. Yet it is very true that the lion's share of people in prison do not agree with the plea agreement they signed. And that's why that new prisoner sought me out and encouraged me to write about it. I didn't write about it. I was still in prison, and I didn't want to bring any additional heartache selfishly to my case, as my release was just 4 or 5 months away. But now that I've been working in the criminal justice space with my team for 14 years, the issue continually comes up, signing a plea agreement that is fraudulent or forced. In fact, there have been defendants over the years, including clients, that have said, "I feel as if the biggest fraud that I'm actually committing is signing this plea agreement." So here I am, nearly 9 p.m. on Wednesday, April 12th or 13th, I believe. I took a couple of walk away from my home, wanted to knock out this video as it's fresh in my mind because I just received a phone call, I should say about 45 minutes ago. I received a phone call from a defendant who said, "The feds, the prosecutor, everyone forced me to sign a bogus plea agreement that sent me to Sheridan Federal Prison Camp, and I'm now home and I want justice. Are you going to help me get justice, Justin? And you and your partner, Michael, and everyone on your team, are you going to help me get justice to this system that forces good people like me?" They forced me to sign this plea agreement. He was yelling at me, and I said, "Dude, only a few times in life I like to be yelled at, when I'm playing dumb with my wife because I may not want to help with the kids." That's why I play dumb, apparently, as good as anyone. I can win an Academy Award for it. There's other times I deserve to get yelled at, and I said, I don't know you. I appreciate you calling, but you shouldn't be yelling at me. Let me tell you who you should be angry with." And he's like, "Well, who's that?" I said, "Yourself, bud. You." I said, "You're not alone in feeling as if you signed a plea agreement that was fraudulent, to use your words, or inaccurate. Indeed, my plea agreement, I don't feel, was fully accurate. After I was released from prison, I had the privilege of speaking at the FBI Academy in Quantico, Virginia. And following my lecture, the FBI agent that arrested me, who invited me to speak, came up to me and said, "It just hit me after hearing your presentation. You didn't take kickbacks." Yet my plea agreement, if you were to Google my name, Justin Paperny, Department of Justice, my plea agreement would tell you that I took kickbacks, but I didn't. Yet it wasn't until I spent hundreds or thousands of hours working along Michael Santos to understand the motivations behind my decisions, the decisions themselves, that I fully understood my story. And then when I told it in front of the FBI, the agent that said, "You didn't take kickbacks," what happened? Why now and not then? I said, I didn't understand my story. I didn't know how to work with a lawyer. I couldn't convey the message. I articulated this to this former prisoner, and I asked him, "Well, how did you prepare for sentencing? How well did you work with your lawyer? Did you understand your story? What did you do? Why did you do it? What did you learn from it? Did you give your lawyer the ammunition?" I mention ammunition because he was lamenting over losing his gun rights now that he's a felon. "Did you give your lawyer the ammunition to articulate on your behalf, to really truly negotiate the best possible plea agreement? Because from what I'm hearing from you, you didn't do that. So therefore the government is going to recreate their version of events as they understand it." I'm not apologizing for the government. There is no doubt that people sign plea agreements they don't agree with. I am one of them. But you know whose fault it is? Not the FBI, not the prosecutor, not my lawyer. It's my fault. It was my fault. I didn't invest the time to properly articulate to my lawyer what I did and why. It's my fault. Now, there are some of you who may feel as if you've done all of that and you've articulated it properly and you're not living in denial and you still feel forced to sign this plea agreement. I have some thoughts. I empathize with you because I know the U.S. attorney, they have such resources and such power in the expense of going to trial, together with the trial tax or penalty, if you were to lose, is just so significant, so damaging, that many of you in the end say, F it, man, I'll just cut my losses and take or sign this plea agreement that I know isn't fully accurate. So what are some takeaways for this video? To the extent that you can, understand your story. Surgeons don't operate on themselves. Dentists don't do their own root canals. There are, I'm sure, people who work with our team who are better writers than people on our team. It's not a matter of great writing. It's a matter of effective storytelling and being able to articulate through your own words what happened, and recreating in a way that is believable and in a way that the stakeholders, like your lawyer and the judge and the prosecutor or the U.S. attorney while negotiating the plea, can get behind. It includes making very good decisions that could, early in the process, good decisions early in the process that could compel them to show you some courtesy or favor. I'll give you an example. I lied to the FBI when they interviewed me, just flat out lied. And about a year later, when we were negotiating this plea agreement, my lawyer, Joel Athey, and Bob Corbin asked the U.S. attorney not to include the fact that I lied to the FBI, because that wasn't perjury, I wasn't under oath, but it was an obstruction of justice. They wanted to include that in the plea agreement, which would have led to more points. David Willingham, to his credit, said, Justin's done well over the last year. He's working. I believe that he's remorseful. He did lie, but he's making better decisions. As a courtesy to you and your client, I'm going to remove it. So in that case, while I didn't agree with the kickbacks in my plea agreement because nobody else's fault, I could not articulate why I actually did not take kickbacks, and for that reason they included it, because from their perspective I can understand why they thought it was kickbacks. So while I didn't get that courtesy, they did me a courtesy by not including the obstruction charge, which would have led potentially to a longer prison sentence. Coming back to this former prisoner who called me, he didn't like some of the questions that I was asking. How did you prepare? How did you work with your lawyer? Did you invest the time to understand your story, how you got there, what you learned, why you broke the law, the pressures you faced, the rationalizations you gave into, the criminal opportunities you seized? Are you able to acknowledge some things you did? Because the more you acknowledge you did, the more credit you may then get. Let me say that again. The more things you may acknowledge you did, they may actually believe you when you say you didn't do that, right? So it's sort of like when Michael Santos interviewed Judge Boo on our YouTube channel. I think Judge Boo said something, and if I get this wrong, forgive me. I think Judge Boo said something akin to, if someone comes in and acknowledge, they sold drugs, which may carry a mandatory minimum, I may be more inclined to believe them if they say, but I didn't have a gun. They've already acknowledged a federal charge. What some defendants do is do kind of blanket denials, or they want their cake and eat it too. They want the best of both worlds. They don't really want to make a decision. Therefore, the government really can't get down to the bottom of it, and they're just forced to, or I shouldn't say forced, they present a plea agreement that in the end the defendant feels forced, cajoled to sign. I encourage this prisoner to somehow, some way embrace the reality that the great news is he's home from prison. The experience is behind him, and I empathize with him, but I encouraged him to begin to build momentum, to begin to make better decisions, and rather than yell at me, someone he doesn't know or had never spoken with until calling, that he build momentum in other areas of life that can get him back on track. Because if not, this experience of signing a plea agreement, in his experience that was fraudulent, he says he felt forced to sign. This experience is truly going to define the rest of his life. He'll never overcome it. He's continuing to talk about it, and I suspect, based on our call, weeks, months, and years from now, he's going to continue to talk about a plea agreement the U.S. attorney forced him to sign. Now, to the U.S. attorney, if you've watched any of our videos, I'm no fan of U.S. attorneys. I do believe at times they overcharge. They threaten, at times, in my opinion, prosecutorial misconduct by compelling or even arguing, forcing people who may go to trial to plead guilty, by threatening to indict their family members. There's no doubt we've had clients who have wanted to go to trial and ultimately signed a plea agreement because the U.S. attorney threatened to indict their family. I'm no friend of theirs. I'm not advocating for them. What I am saying is they have not put a gun to your head. You can go to trial. To the extent that you can work well with your lawyer and understand the facts of the case, you can maybe take a plea agreement that you think is 90% fraudulent or fake, maybe get it down to 70, maybe get it down to 50, maybe get it down to 40, maybe get it down to 30. It will never be perfect. It just won't be. It's never going to be perfect, and it's just not going to be perfect. It's a really difficult time going through the criminal justice system. I mean, let's not spin that. Prison's hard. It's embarrassing. It's tough. To the extent that you can make it better, work. To the extent that you can demonstrate why you're worthy of leniency, do it. So I walk back to see my family. I want to film this video while it's fresh in my mind. If any of you feels if you are signing a bogus plea agreement, I'm sorry. Work as best you can to get it as accurate as you can. But if it isn't, it's just part of the journey. Eventually this will end, and I empathize with you. Just don't let it define the rest of your life, because if it does, then these people, the feds, the government, and they've moved on with their life. They're catching new cases. That U.S. attorney's a defense attorney. They've forgotten about you. They'll never think about you again. Stop thinking about them. You know, what are they winning? What are they getting? They're getting your health. They're getting your sanity. They're getting your future. You've already served your time. Let it freaking end. Enough is enough. Goodbye.